What will the Jets' final record be? Will Quinnen Williams get a big payday? Will any Jets assistant generate head coaching buzz? We'll discuss all of this and more on today's mailbag edition of the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, November 16th, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com, thanking you for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. This podcast is free, and it's available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit the subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps the channel out, and it helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Today we have our weekly mailbag show. Thanks to everybody who sent in questions. Each Wednesday we try and do a mailbag. Let's jump right into it. And our first question is about Quinnen Williams. Will the Jets offer Quinnen Williams a big payday? And if he gets paid, will he revert back to just being good instead of being great like he's been this year? I think the Jets will offer Quinnen Williams a big payday. In fact, even before this breakout this season, I've been expecting it. Because at some point, don't you have to try and keep your good players? I mean, it's been one of the issues with the Jets through the years that they do not hit on many draft picks. And on the ones they do hit on, somehow those players always seem to get away. And it's not entirely the team's fault. But now it's even more imperative to keep Quinnen Williams around because you've got a really solid core. And part of the luxury of having so many young players that you've drafted succeed is that you can spend money to keep core players in place because the Garrett Wilsons of the world, the Sauce Gardners of the world, when he returns from injury, the Breece Halls of the world, they're not going to be making much money the next couple of years. So that means you have plenty of money to keep a guy like a Quinnen Williams around. So, I mean, it seems like a no-brainer, doesn't it? Now, the question, the second part of the question is, after the Jets pay Quinnen Williams, will he go back to being good instead of just being great like he's been this year? And the answer is we don't really know. Because there's always a possibility that this is just a career year for Quinnen. You hope not. You hope that this is the start of something big because it's also possible that he has completely figured it out, that everything's clicking for him now, and going forward he's going to be a dominant force. But I feel like giving Quinnen Williams a contract is kind of a safe move because it's very unlikely he's going to regress to a great degree. I know it can happen. I know it has happened in the past, but we know he's a good player. This is not like a guy who's not been very good and then gets paid and goes back to not being very good. A good example of that would be Brian Winters, who was never an all-pro level player. He was never a Pro Bowl level player, but in his contract year of 2016, Brian Winters put together what was probably his best season, and the Jets gave him a big contract after that, and he really regressed. He really went back to being a guy who was not a particularly reliable guard. The good news here for Quinnen Williams is that even if you give him a big contract, it may not be worth it, but it's very unlikely it's going to be a catastrophe contract. It might end up being a slight overpay, but you still I feel like it's the kind of overpay you could live with, and if he's great, he'll continue to be great. I was all for paying Quinnen Williams even before this breakout season because, again, at some point you got to keep your good players. And Quinnen Williams, even before this year, was a very good player for the Jets. And I felt a lot of the criticism that was thrown in his direction was frankly kind of unfair. I don't think you can ever demand that a player who's drafted third overall be great, even though it's a very high draft pick. But I think Quinnen Williams, I mean, how do you not pay him after this year? How do you not pay him after the season he's had? I just don't see it. I would have liked to have seen them locked him up over the offseason. Because you know what? Jets probably would be if the Jets had worked this deal out before the start of the season, you'd probably be looking at a bargain contract for Quinnen Williams, based on the way he's playing. I'm always a fan of being proactive. I'm a fan of locking up your core young players as soon as possible because the cap's not going to go down. New TV deals kicking in. A new TV contract for the league. that means the cap's going to go up because the league is going to be making a lot more money than it has in the past with this new TV contract. And the salary cap's based on the amount of money the league makes at the end of the day. So I'm all for keeping Quinnen Williams. Will he stay playing at this level? I hope so. I mean, it's tough to predict if he's going to keep staying at this level or he'll revert back to being the guy he was maybe in 2019, 2020, 2021. But you're still getting a very good player. You're not going to... I think it's very unlikely you're looking at a total disaster. Our next question, John, with all of the excitement about the Jets thus far and the attention and accolades that many players have received, I feel like one starter I have not heard much about is Connor McGovern. Have you noticed his play at all when you've looked at the film? Here's the best way I can put it. If you've been a long-time listener, and if you haven't, then I'll tell you. The first couple of years, the history of Locked On Jets, one of the most frequent vents that I have, one of the most frequent rants that I had was how bad the Jets were at center. And I understand it. This is not the NFL of the early 2000s where teams were playing lots of 3-4 defenses. And in the 3-4 defense, you'd have a big 330-pound nose tackle lining up directly across from the center. It was absolutely critical that you had a center. You don't see teams play like that much anymore. You see more 4-man lines, and even when you have 3-man lines, because of the prevalence of the passing game, these tend to be guys who try and penetrate more than just hold up the point of attack. So the center position, in some ways, is kind of reduced in importance. But center killed the Jets for years, and it started when Nick Mangold got hurt in 2016. Wesley Johnson took over, and for whatever reason, I still can't figure it out. 2016 was a year where Wesley Johnson got a lot of praise from the Jets fan base. I never really understood it, and they brought him back as the starter in 17, and it was a disaster. Then the Jets gave Spencer Long a free agent contract in 2018, and that didn't work out, and that's one I have to admit I liked at the time. 2019, they kind of neglected it when Mike McCagnon was the GM, and they went with Jonathan Harrison, who had been a backup. Another guy who got a lot of praise, who I really, like Wesley Johnson, difficult to understand. They were going to go with him, and then Mike McCagnon got fired. Joe Douglas comes in, makes a desperation signing of Ryan Khalil. That doesn't work out. Connor McGovern comes the following offseason, the offseason of 2020. And, he's got off to a rough start, but since the first half of his first year with the Jets, he's been really solid, and he's stabilized the position. Now, there are some things that go on pre-snap, and a lot of what the center does goes unnoticed because he works with the quarterback typically to make sure you're in the right protection, to make sure you're in the right blocking scheme. And the center's importance really grows when you're dealing with a young quarterback, because young quarterbacks, they're still learning the ropes. They're still figuring things out. They don't really have as much knowledge. So a situation where you have a young quarterback and a veteran center, there's a lot more that falls on the center's plate because the quarterback's still kind of, new to the NFL, new to the schemes he's looking at. So he needs more help. And I think for the most part, Connor McGovern's been really solid. I think he's done a good job blocking. In fact, I'm at the point where, he's going to be a free agent after this year. And I'm not sure I understand why he hasn't been extended yet, because he's been excellent for the Jets, and there's no obvious successor on the team. If the Jets had drafted a center early last year, I would be able to understand more why Connor McGovern's not been extended, because you could say, okay, well, you drafted somebody, you let him learn for a year on the bench, and then he steps in year 2. That has not happened. So this is one thing. The Jets have some issues on the offensive line after the season that they're going to have to figure out. It would be nice to not have to worry about center, a position where the Jets have found a guy who, if he's not Kevin Mawai or Nick Mangold, has at least provided them with some needed stability. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll continue our Wednesday mailbag show. We are going to talk about the scheme the Jets run. They are not a blitz-heavy team. Could that change the second half of the season? I'll tell you what I think as we continue this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Turo. Turo is the world's largest car-sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want to, from a community of local hosts. You can browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the US, UK, Canada, and coming soon to Australia. So if you're traveling to Foxborough for Sunday's game and you need a car, Well, you can book a spacious SUV or minivan. You can get a classic or luxury car for a special event, birthday, or holiday. You can find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget and just need to get from point A to point B. You can test drive that new electric vehicle you've had your eye on to see how it fits into your everyday life. Many Turo hosts can deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Forget boring rental cars. And find your drive at Turo, Turo.com. Thank you again for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. This podcast is free and available on all platforms. We continue with our weekly mailbag. Our next question, John. The Jets defense has been playing at an elite level. However, we usually rush only 4 players and are not incredibly creative with the pass rush. As teams begin to adapt the second half of the season, do you see the Jets becoming a little bit more exotic and blitzing more to create pressure? Or is this defensive line good enough to stay status quo? Well, that's a great question. This is the way I look at it. Every scheme, no matter what you do, has a strength and a weakness. And the Jets scheme, they're not blitz heavy. They tend to like to rush 4. They leave 7 guys back. So let's think about this logically. So if you're only rushing 4, your weakness should be your pass rush. And your strength should be your coverage because you got 7 guys in coverage versus 5 receivers. Sometimes we overthink this stuff with football. I mean, it's really that simple. You're only rushing 4 against 5 offensive linemen, but you got 7 defenders in coverage against receivers. So the fact that Jets are still generating pressure, rushing only 4 that frequently, that shows you why the defense is so successful. Because the thing they're supposed to be weak at, they're pretty good at. And this goes back into the team building. And this was something I discussed a lot last offseason, and it still continued to apply this year. There's a reason the Jets are investing so much on this defensive line. There's a reason they went out and got Carl Lawson a year ago. There's a reason, even though he hasn't been spectacular yet, the Jets went and traded up for Jermaine Johnson. And there's a reason that they paid John Franklin Myers. There's a reason they kept Sheldon Rankins around. They want guys who can dominate up front. So, will it change? The nice thing for the Jets is it can, because you're so good at corner that, you can trust Sauce Gardner one-on-one. You can trust DJ Reed. You can even trust, to a lesser extent, Michael Carter II to hold up one-on-one. So, if you blitz more, well, the numbers kind of change. Let's say, you send 6 pass rushers versus 5 offensive linemen. That means you're 5-on-5 on the back end. That's tough to do, to man up 5-on-5. But you have 6 versus 5 up front. Then you're stronger in the pass rush. You're weaker in coverage. But you have guys who can hold up in coverage. So that's the beauty of what the Jets have right now on this defense. However, I do think that this is, I think in his heart of hearts now, he's been pretty adaptable if you look at his career in San Francisco and even with the Jets. So Robert Saleh will adapt to what he has, but it's working really well. And, you could say defenses can adapt. There's only so much you can do when the defense is, as an offense, when the defense is getting home rushing 4. Because, the most likely thing you can do is leave an extra blocker in. But then you are creating an even bigger advantage on the back of the defense, because then it's just 4 receivers versus 7 coverage guys. So you're making the coverage even easier for the defense. If it's working, I don't know that there's going to be a lot of change to it. You may see a game plan specific thing against a given opponent, but I don't know that it's going to change all that much. Our next question: will Max Mitchell start at right tackle against the Patriots? It could help the run game having Mitchell instead of Cedric Ogbuehi, and I think Mitchell has been solid in pass protection before getting hurt. Well, we will know more on Wednesday. And the way it typically works for an NFL team is Wednesday is the day the game plan begins to get installed. It tends to happen Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Some teams may vary from this a little bit, but typically the way the NFL schedule works is, Monday is the day after a game. So you'll have some film review. Guys will recover, get some treatment from injuries. Tuesday is the day where players are typically off. So what happens is the coaches come in. That's when the coaches really kind of cook up the game plan. They take however many 100 plays there are in the playbook, and they come up with like the handful that they'll want to run against that particular opponent. Some of it's based on what your team does well. Some of it's based on plays that you think in particular can defeat your opponent. Wednesday is really the first day of practice for the week. So if you ever notice the injury report, it comes out Wednesday for the first time, and then you get additional injury reports Thursday, Friday. But that's why it's always key to watch what happens on Wednesday for when a player's recovering from injury, because that's the first day of the week of practice. And if somebody's going to be in the lineup, not always, sometimes but it's more with veteran players. You'll give them rest days. We should have a better idea whether Max Mitchell or George Fant will be back for this game today. Will it help the Jets? I don't know how much Mitchell over Owehi helps the Jets. I don't think Mitchell's been that good as a run blocker. I think, if you look at him, he's still kind of undersized. This was supposed to be a year he was supposed to hit the weight room and put on some bulk. I think he gets pushed around a lot. He's not that strong right now. I think he's a little bit better as a pass protector, but he's still, he's had a couple games where he was okay, but he really has not been all that great. I don't know. I think George Fant could be a bigger help than Owehi. Now, George Fant's also not a great run blocker, but he's athletic, and he might be able, he really should be an upgrade in pass protection, which is really important because Zach Wilson's really struggled this year under pressure. So I think that's a key. I think George Fant would be a bigger deal than Mitchell. I don't think, I really don't think Max Mitchell's going to be that big of a deal returning over Owehi. And that's just, it's nothing against Max Mitchell. I think he can be a good player down the line. I just don't think he's there right now. Our next question: what would you rather happen on Sunday against Belichick and the Pats? Would you rather win, or would you rather settle for the loss and follow the infamous path of the coin flip projection? So if you're not familiar with this, back in August, there was this Jets fan who posted this picture on Twitter, and he essentially went through the schedule and he flipped a coin for every game. Essentially, the coin decided whether the game would be a win or a loss. Either heads was win, tails was loss, or it was vice versa. I can't remember which of the two. But he essentially had the Jets going all the way to the AFC Championship game. And here's the thing. The coin was right on the first 9 games of the season. So again, every game, so it was like week 1, Baltimore, flip the coin. Week 2, Cleveland, flip the coin. Week 3, Cincinnati, flip the coin. And again, either heads was win, tails was loss, or it was vice versa. But he was right. The coin has been right the first 9 games of the season. So I believe the coin has the Jets losing this weekend. But the coin has the Jets going all the way to the AFC Championship game. So, you know what? I would take a loss this weekend if it guaranteed the Jets a spot in the AFC Championship game. As great as a win would be, I'll take the coin. I'll take the coin. If the coin gets me to the AFC Championship game, then hopefully that's when the coin's luck runs out, because the coin has the Jets losing the AFC Championship game. So hopefully the luck runs out then, and maybe the Jets can get to the Super Bowl. Anyways, we continue this Wednesday mailbag edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. We're going to take a look ahead to the offseason. With the Jets' success, could one of their assistants generate head coaching buzz for another team? I'll tell you what I think as we close out this Wednesday mailbag. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus their leading competitors. And LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. Again, that's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. The Jets are underdogs this weekend at New England. The Jets, despite their 6-3 record, they've been underdogs almost every game this season. Jets still getting no respect from the odds makers. But if you're a fan, that might be a good thing, because you can watch the Jets win and you can make some money while doing it, putting money down on them. You should know that BetOnline is the #1 source. You can get all the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. They've got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. They are the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Wednesday. We're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question: will the injury to Shelton Rankins create more playing time for Jermaine Johnson? It might indirectly, because Rankin's getting injured, conceivably could have John Franklin Myers slide inside more frequently to defensive tackle, which would open up defensive end for Jermaine Johnson. I don't think Jermaine's the guy who most benefits from it, though, because Rankin's really defensive tackle. Jermaine Johnson's an end. I think Jermaine Johnson's going to play a role on this team going forward. To be honest with you, I think Jermaine Johnson, the only problem with him is that he's not been as good as like everybody else, because you had 3 other rookies who've been playing phenomenal football. Even Breece Hall's injured, but he was in the running for Offensive Rookie of the Year when he was playing. You got Garrett Wilson, who's playing at a really high level. Sauce Gardner, who's going to contend for All-Pro this year. You look at Jermaine Johnson, the guy who's making maybe a play or two a game and looking just solid. And by comparison, maybe you're not as impressed, but I still think he's playing pretty well. I think the guy who benefits most, though, from the Rankins injury is probably Nathan Shepard. I think he's probably the next guy up, so he'll see a lot more playing time. I think there could be a little bit more playing time, though, for Jermaine if John Franklin Myers moves inside a little bit more. Our next question is, Mike LaFleur or Jeff Ulbrich more likely to be interviewed for potential NFL head coaching jobs later this year? I think it's LaFleur for a couple of reasons. First is Ulbrich is defensive coordinator, but the Jets have a defensive-oriented head coach in Robert Saleh. So even though Saleh, it seems like he delegates a lot, and Saleh even said when he was, go back to when Saleh was hired, he said that he wanted to be the head coach of the full football team. He wanted to delegate defensive responsibility. I think in a case like this in the league, there still can be a perception that, well, he's running Saleh's defense. How much of it is him? How much of it is Saleh? All the success. I think the bigger reason, though, is Mike LaFleur just kind of fits the template of what a lot of NFL teams are looking for. He's a young offensive mind. He's creative. And beyond that, he's got the Kyle Shanahan pedigree. He worked under Kyle Shanahan for all those years. So, a lot of NFL teams are looking for, especially teams developing quarterbacks, are looking for a young, coach with innovative ideas. And, Mike LaFleur's been pretty creative, but especially guys off either the McVay tree or the Shanahan tree. And Mike LaFleur is clearly, off the Shanahan tree. So my guess would be Mike LaFleur. Now, Zach Wilson's performance will dictate a lot. Now, if Zach Wilson looks like he's really beginning to develop down the stretch, Jets make the playoffs, I do think Mike LaFleur has a shot to be a really hot coaching candidate. Jeff Ulbrich might generate some buzz. I'm not saying he won't, because this defense has been excellent this year. And it's kind of funny to think about that, because as recent as week 4, people hated Jeff Ulbrich, and the defense was playing horrible. They were awful in the game against Cleveland week 2. They did not do the job week 3 against the Bengals. Lots of mistakes and now suddenly the Jets defense looks great. Who would have, if I had told you heading into week 4 that we'd be here in November and Jeff Ulbrich, we'd be seriously talking about him as a potential head coaching candidate, I don't think you would have believed it, would you have? And our last question. During the first half of the season, the Jets played some of the top defenses in the league and came out of it 6-3. Now in the second half, it seems like they will face some of the better offensive teams. What record do you think the Jets will finish with? Do you think the team is better suited to face these offensive teams? And will Zach do better now that he will face some of the worst defenses? Will Zach do better now that he's facing worse defenses than he did in the first half? Well, at this point, Jets really just need to go 4-4 over these last 8 games to finish 10-7. And a 10-win season is amazing, and a 10-win season probably gets you to the playoffs. So, all you have to do is split those games. I do think the Jets are better suited to face good offensive teams than they are to face good defensive teams, because the strength is the defense. So I think, if you're going up against a great defensive team, it's going to be a struggle for the offense. Going up against a great offensive team, though, the defense has a fighting chance because the defense is very good in its own right. And, you saw the defense did the job against the Buffalo Bills. So that's pretty elite competition right there. So they've shown they can go toe-to-toe with really good teams. So I think that things line up pretty well for them. Will Zach Wilson do better now that he's facing some worse defenses? You would think. Listen, that was one of the stories. It's maybe not the decisive one, but when you face, and not so much this weekend because New England still got a pretty good defense, but you would think that it's going to get easier when Zach Wilson goes up against defenses that aren't quite as good. That just seems very logical to me. The quality of your competition certainly does impact your performance. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button. You'll never miss an episode. If you're listening on a podcast source, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. Help the channel out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Have a great Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow. I'll join Mike Debate for Crossover Thursday, and we will preview Jets-Patriots, Round 2.